for the participant of this panel. So Professor Korn titled today a tile panel from Damascus and its iconography. Professor Korn, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Tawfiq, for this friendly introduction. And thanks to Daniela and Yoni for bringing us together here. And yeah, I really enjoy this conference. And my topic is slightly off the medieval in the title of the conference, but we will see how the connections are. Actually, the starting point of my paper is a tile panel from the splendid holdings of the Aga Khan Museum that you see here. It's published in several exhibition catalogs, and it has intrigued me for a while because of the contrast between the realistic depiction of the niche on the one hand, with its architectural frame, the hanging lamp and the two candlesticks in the front, and the added element of the two black silhouettes in the center that disturb this realism. For the educated and the Islamicist, it seems clear that these depict the sandals of the Prophet. At least this is what we read in the catalog texts on the object. Extending our curiosity a bit further, we may ask, first, what does this iconographic element mean? Second, where does it come from, particularly in this distinct shape? And third, what is its function in the context of a mihrab? In this short presentation, I'm not going to fully answer these questions, but maybe we can track down a few of the connections and associations that went along with this image object and which give it a place between ritual belief and material culture of Islam. Part of what I'm going to say has been published in a collective volume dealing with footprints in various religions that appeared in 2020, edited by Julia Hegewald. And here I would like to modify and to expand some of the interpretations that I have given in that paper. The flat depiction of a mihrab, mostly in relief, is a frequent phenomenon in Islamic culture. As we've heard yesterday from Stephanie Mulder, it was Nuha Khouri who termed these mihrab images, the ritual function of which should not be confused with full-fledged mihrab niches. In many cases, the exact meaning of the flat mihrab leaves room for interpretation, for example, whether they could have served as a grave marker. But the mimetic character of these images is unmistakable, referring to the mihrab niche. The example on the right is from Ghazni. It's in the David collection. Close parallels to the tile panel in the Aga Khan Museum can be seen in other ensembles with similar forms and the characteristic color scheme of pale green and dark blue. They can all be dated to the late 16th century and are attributed to Damascus. One of these mihrab panels forms part of the interior decoration in the Victorian London home of the painter Frederick Leighton, who traveled to the Near East and bought tiles in Damascus in 1873. Another parallel can be found in the mihrab panels in the Darwishia Mosque in Damascus. This mosque was founded in 1574-75 by the Ottoman governor of Damascus, Darwish Basha. The facade of the prayer hall under the courtyard portico is ornated with two mihrab panels, which resemble the Aga Khan panels so closely that it is possible to attribute all of them to the same workshop. The major iconographic difference between the two panels in the Darwishia is that one of them shows the two candlesticks, which are missing on the other panel. On both panels, an inscription gives the clear hint that the two black silhouettes depict the sandals of the Prophet Muhammad, مثال نعل النبي. يا ناظرا لمثال نعل نبيه قبل مثال النعل لا متكبرا وامسح بوجهك نعله إذ مسه قدم النبي مروحا ومبكرا. In an online article dealing with these panels published in 2015, the author Ahmed Khomeini identifies the verses of the inscription as a variant of those by a 12th century Andalusian author, Ali ibn Ibrahim al-Balansi, and these verses can be found as a quotation in al-Makkari's voluminous work Fath al-Muta'al fi Math al-Ni'al. And with this book, we are in the middle of a pious movement that took the sandals of the Prophet as an object of veneration. Shihab ad-Din Ahmed al-Makkari, who died in 1632, compiled more than 600 pages in the current Cairo edition of poetic praise about the Prophet's sandals. Copies of his work usually also contained graphic renditions of the sandals, top left, in different versions, all of them with the characteristic outlines pointed at the tip and narrow in the middle part. Similar representations became widespread also on single leaves, which could be put up somewhere, such as the finely illuminated example, probably from India on the right, or they could be worn as a talisman, like the one on the bottom right here. These schematic depictions of the sandals were sometimes also included in one of the most widespread religious books of the Ottoman period, Al-Jazuli's Dala'il al-Khairat, top left. The veneration for the Prophet's sandal in this characteristic shape and its talismanic use has apparently never stopped, as we can see on a present-day website advertising jewelry with a representation of the sandal in its typical outline. However, on the same site, we also find objects designed with the same motif under the heading footprint. It seems that there is a close connection between the two, not only through the fact that the Prophet's feet are somehow involved, by touching either the sandal or the rocky ground, both of which became venerated as relics. Uri Rubin's statement that closely associated with the veneration of the Prophet's sandals is that of his footprints is obviously not only true for ritual practice, but also for the shape and image of the two. When we try to trace back the relics of the sandal and the footprint with their imagery, we arrive at a situation where information becomes rather patchy, but it makes clear that we are dealing with a long-established phenomenon. The sandals of the Prophet seem to have gained particular renown from early on. They were considered a sign of his prophethood, and it's impossible to determine how many sandal relics were around during the classical Abbasid period, but it seems to have been more than one pair. We are on safer ground in the Ayyubid period when it is reported that Al-Ashraf Musa, ruler of the Jazeera, confiscated a sandal of the Prophet and donated it to the Dar al-Hadith that he founded in Damascus near the citadel in 1234-1235. Rubin underlines that depictions of the sandal became widespread, particularly in the Maghrib, where access to the original relics was difficult. This is confirmed by the lines written by a 13th century female poet quoted by Annemarie Schimmel. I shall kiss the image if I do not find a way to kiss the Prophet's sandal. Perhaps the good fortune of kissing it will be granted to me in paradise in the most radiant place, and I rub my heart on it so that perhaps the burning thirst which rages in it may be quenched. This attests not only to the fact that the sandal and its depictions became venerated, but also to the fervent emotions that they were able to elicit in the believers. There seems to be a parallel with the Qasidat al-Burda, the poem of the mantle of on the mantle of the Prophet, written by the 13th century poet al-Busiri, which became one of the most popular religious texts in the Arab world. The tendency to engage with the physical features of the Prophet and with his relics as a mode of veneration seems to run counter to the practice of representing the Prophet's figure in painting, as the features of his face became more and more overlaid with the representation of the prophetic light, the Nur Muhammadi, in paintings of the depicting the prophet. This is what Christiane Gruber has clarified in her writings. And one might add that as a consequence from this development, the hilye, the description of the physical appearance of the prophet in a particular graphic arrangement created by the calligrapher Hafiz Osman towards the end of the 17th century, became popular as a sublimate mode of devotion. But this is another story. For the sandals of the prophet, we can summarize here that their depiction has only been preserved from the Ottoman period onwards, or slightly earlier, that it became more widespread parallel to the propagation of the virtues in al-Makkari's work, and that the shape of the sandal, as we see it already in a late Mamluk pilgrimage certificate, became fixed as an icon, as Abdelmajid ibn Abdelaziz has formulated in an online article published in 2017. Nonetheless, keeping in mind Uri Rubin's statement that the veneration of the sandal was connected with that of his footprints, I would like to have...
And I'm too cute for my own good.
I would like to have a closer look at these. Here it seems that the phenomenon reaches back far into the pre-Islamic period. Footprints were apparently an age-old device to support the imagination that the divine is present by showing impressions in stone. They underline, of course, the supernatural force exerted by the feet of the venerated, and allow the believers to come closer to, in some cases even touch with their hands, the place where the real presence of the divine has left its imprints. The giant footprints on the threshold of the late Hittite temple of Ain Dara in northern Syria are probably a singular case in the ancient Near East. It has been assumed that they indicate the god's presence in the temple. Difficult to see on the photo, I think. For centuries, the giant footprints on the top of Adam's Peak in Sri Lanka were venerated by Buddhists and Hindus as Buddha's and Shiva's footprints. According to Muslim lore, this was the place where Adam set his foot on earth after being driven from paradise. The footprint on Adam's Peak could serve as a proof for the event, as tangible evidence. And one should perhaps not rule out Sri Lanka and southern India as possible factors for the Muslim practice of venerating footprints of the prophet. Another likely source is the Christian veneration of footsteps, most prominently those of Christ at the site of his ascension on the Mount of Olives. They were also widely depicted as shown here on the left, but there are also other Christian footprints in stone as those preserved in Rome on the Via Appia, where Jesus appeared to the fleeing St. Peter and made him return to the city to undergo his martyrdom. For the Islamic world, the number of sites holding footprints of the Prophet Muhammad has, to my knowledge, not been firmly established. Footprints in fixed rocks were not only part of established pilgrimage centers like in Mecca, but also apt to create a pilgrimage such as the one of Al-Qadam in the suburb of Damascus. In the 14th century, the famous Ibn Taymiyyah condemned this practice, but in vain. There were also movable footprints on smaller pieces of rock, which became objects not only of veneration, but also of collection and even trade. Of course, there were not only footprints attributed to Muhammad, but also those left by other prophets. The greatest veneration is paid to the footprints of Abraham, which form a little shrine of their own in the Haram of Mecca. For the Shiites, it was natural that the Imams also had the power to leave footprints in the rock, and there are several of them as sites of pilgrimage, for which the term Qadamgah is common in Iran. Here, the footprints of the 8th Imam Ali al-Rida, and these appear also in depictions such as this one from the 16th century. The need to identify imprints on rocks as footprints does not stop with humans, but extends also on animals. such as the camel of the Prophet or the horse of Ali, which allegedly left a deep hole in a rock at the site of Pir Bakran in the region of Isfahan. We skip this one. The most important footsteps in Islamic religion are, however, those in the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. The rock bears the impression not only of the Buraq, but also of the Prophet himself. And it's in this, and thereby is witness of the Mi'raj, the crucial event when Muhammad was allowed to see the heavens and to appear before God, the event by which, according to tradition, ritual prayer was regulated for mankind. Muhammad's footprint on the Rock of Jerusalem became the Qadam an-Nabi par excellence. During the Ottoman period, it became in turn an object of veneration in its depicted form. We encounter it in the silver footprint from the Topkapi Saray and as a pair of feet on a Kütahya tile. Both are clearly identified as showing the Qadam an-Nabi in Jerusalem, as the Mi'raj is also mentioned in the accompanying texts. The footprint in Jerusalem became also a feature on pilgrimage guides. And here on a pilgrimage certificate of the 18th or 19th century, it is also depicted in a paired form. And it's interesting to see that the shape of the footprints strongly resembles that of the sandals. The graphic depictions of the two had apparently contaminated each other. And one might wonder at which point in time this happened and the two motifs became interchangeable to a certain degree. Is it possible that the depiction on the mihrab panel in from Damascus in the Aga Khan collection had also behind it the notion of the footprints of the Prophet, which strengthened the believer and made the real presence of the Prophet a palpable experience? True, we have seen that the inscriptions in the Darwishia clearly address the beholder of the image of the sandal, not the footprint. However, there is another aspect that the silhouettes in the mihrab evoke, and this aspect is perhaps better connected with footprints than with the sandal. And if you give me another 2 minutes, I think I can conclude with this other aspect. It is the element of standing in prayer, Arabic wuquf or Qiyam. Islamic ritual prayer is commonly associated with kneeling and bending to the ground, sujood. Yet standing upright makes an equally important part of ritual prayer. Religious scholars obviously considered it highly. Al-Ghazali in his Ihya devotes a whole chapter to it. In some way, the Qiyam during prayer can be seen as a reminiscence of the standing in God's presence during the pilgrimage, wuquf on the day of Arafat, when the believers stand facing the holy mountain, pronouncing the talbiyah. Certain prayer rugs show two elongated motifs with a narrow central part in the place where the feet are usually placed. And this way the rug is designated for prayer and the position of the believer during prayer is indicated. And in my opinion, this is much more than an instruction for use as we would find it on some present day icons on bathroom mats, etc. It invites the believer to understand the first stage of his ritual prayer as an imitation of the Prophet, when he finds himself stepping into the footprints or touching the sandals, the icons of the sandals of Muhammad. This becomes even clearer with those large carpets that divide the available space in segments for individual believers, with the depiction of a niche, a hanging lamp, and two footprint silhouettes for each person. Surely this could be taken as a practical order that helped to keep the rows of believers straight, but it was much more than that. It was a spiritual symbol that they were each following the example of the Prophet. With the panel of the Damascus tiles, the accent was put on a slightly different aspect, the loving approach of the believer to the Prophet's figure when he was invited to rub his face against the image of the sandal, the element highlighted that was highlighted as it runs counter the otherwise realistic representation of the mihrab. The marks of footprints on the carpets in combination with the mihrab image, or in some special cases with the image of the Haram of Mecca, however, puts the emphasis on the direct connection with God, which the believer intends when he puts himself up for prayer, according to the hadith stating that the Lord is between him and the Qibla. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Korn, for this. Really, I expect, and already Yeshua commented, and the others. So we'll have more by the end of this session, whole discussion, and your talk raised a lot of inquiries, and so we will go on. Thank you very much. The second, we have to move on as this setting, as this discussion is by the end of the panel, so please be patient and write your questions. You are recommended to write in the chat box, so please do. So our next speaker is Dr. Alibhai, or Asgar Alibhai, who holds a PhD from the Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations Department at the Harvard University, November 2080. He is a scholar of the histories and cultures of Muslim societies and focuses his research on the medieval Maghreb and Mediterranean worlds, with specializations in the histories and art and the architecture of medieval Tunisia, Sicily, Spain, and Morocco. Ali's academic work combines the study of textual and historical studies with art and architectural history to further understand the socio-cultural history and material culture of the medieval Islamic world. He is currently a visiting assistant professor in art history at the University of Texas, Dallas, and the Edith O'Donnell Institute of Art History. Ali is currently working on his book project entitled Sacred Sound and Symbolism in Medieval Islamic Society, the Bell Lamp, and the Adhan, analyzing sound from the perspectives of Muslims and Christians. This book is the first comparative study of its kind on the subject of the public expression of different oral and visual forms of sacred sound in medieval Islamic societies. And his title today is Sacred Sound to Sacred Light, Understanding the Evolution of Maghribi Bell Lamps. So please, Dr. Alibhai, the floor is yours.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone on the other part of the world. And thank you, Tawfiq, for the introduction. Thank you, Daniela and Yoni, for this opportunity. All of your virtual hospitality is really felt thousands of miles away. And I hope that one day soon we're able to get together and rekindle these flames that we started here in this wonderful conference that you guys have put together. So thank you very much. And I'll start because I think I do have quite a bit. And if I do get close to my time, please let me know and I'll sum up. So as we have learned in our previous sessions yesterday, that Stephanie Mulder gave, and this morning that Lorenz Korn gave, light has always held a distinct position in Islamic religious thought, as well as visual culture. The Ayat Nur, the light verse from the Quran, asserts that God is the light of the heavens and the earth, and likens light to a niche in which there's a lamp, which we have seen again and again represented in visual culture alongside other important symbols and iconographies that we just saw of the sandal. But as a result of the importance of the light verse, the lamp as a ritual object also possesses a unique position in Islamic religious thought and visual culture. And I use the term ritual object with lamps here quite purposefully, and I hope that we can discuss whether or not we do consider lamps as a ritualistic object or not at the end of this presentation. just as light is positioned to possess divine attributes from the metaphorical allegories articulated in the light verse, lamps also have been prominently exalted in the words of the Quran. For example, in Surah 71, verse 16, the Quran says, "And he made the moon a light among them, and he made the sun a lamp, a shamsa sirajan." Additionally, in Surah 33, verses 45 to 46, the Quran likens the Prophet to a lamp by saying, "O Prophet, truly we have sent you as a witness, a bearer of good tidings, a warner, and one who calls the faithful to Allah with his permission, and as a lamp spreading light." The Quran's message is clear. Light and lamps were comparable to celestial bodies of the heavens because these celestial bodies provided physical guidance, and likewise, lamps were compared to the Prophet because he provided spiritual guidance. Therefore, medieval Islamic lamps represented divine guidance and spiritual illumination, and patrons who commissioned lamps, specifically for mosques and other important buildings, could align themselves with those pious characteristics while simultaneously asserting their religio-political authority. Throughout the medieval period, medieval Muslim caliphs and rulers across the Islamic world went to great lengths to richly commission, construct, and ornament lamps. In the far Maghrib region of the Islamic world, which is primarily the geographic regions comprising modern-day southern Spain, Morocco, Algeria, as we all know, the tradition of caliphal and royal lamp patronage took a unique form. Muslim rulers in these areas commonly forged copper-alloyed moss lamps ornamented from appropriated bells taken from various Christian settlements and churches during their military excursions on the Iberian Peninsula between the 10th and 14th centuries. Christian bells have been used in various forms of pre-modern Islamic material culture, which I won't get time to talk about today of the other various forms. But the persistent practice of forging lamps from bells is peculiar to the Maghrib region of the Islamic world. And as I mentioned, it's a tradition which began in 10th century Umayyad Cordoba. So this project is something that I started a long time ago when I was a master's student in Texas before going to Harvard. So the artifact on the left is actually a bell lamp. What you can see is a tanur lamp or a concentric sort of wicks and candle holders surrounding an object which very much looks like what a regular mosque lamp would look like. But in the center, you can see a bell. And then there's various ornamentation that makes the lamp a whole piece in total. And often or not, people who walk through and see these lamps often don't recognize that the bell is actually in the center of these lamps. The artifact of the right is me in my youthful days when I spent a year in Morocco studying this phenomena and this cultural thing before I got white sideburns and started seeing a bald spot on the top of my head. But anyways, it's a project that I've been working on for a long time alongside my doctoral research, and it's something that I'm hoping to publish in the coming months. But the main location for extant bell lamps is in present-day Morocco at the Qarawin Mosque situated in Fez. The Almoravid patrons of the mosque intensified the significance of the central aisle in the 11th century by escalating its decorative scheme throughout the construction of a series of 10 cupolas that begin from the gable of the courtyard and extend to the Qibla wall. 10 ornate medieval copper alloy lamps produced in the Almohad and Marinid periods hang in the center of each cupola and serve to enhance the decorative architectural ornamentation of the central aisle, which you can see on the right quite clearly here. During the late medieval period, the 16th century chronicler and traveler Leo Africanus gives an account of the amount of illumination within the Qarawin Mosque. He writes that, quote, "Every night 900 candles were lit within the mosque, every arch with its own candle, and the central aisle leading to the mihrab was itself lit by 150 oil lamps," end quote. So the point to note here is that this passage reminds us that the illumination of mosques was also a daily ritual associated with different timings. When it became dark, I'm sure that the lighting process would take place. Now, the lamps themselves, I won't go into detail here. They are rich with calligraphic ornamentation, both Kufic and Naskhi styles. The calligraphy bears religious, political, and epigraphic formulas that echo referential connotations to the historical period in which these lamps were made. And therefore, the range of each lamp's own configuration is unique with its own unique architectonic, calligraphic, and arabesque ornament and structure. And each lamp basically in the Qarawin Mosque is a separate work of art. There are two main types. Here we can categorize this as type A, in which you can kind of see a base plate at the bottom, followed by a base with knobs on the bottom. Those knobs would be used to lower the lamp on the ground so that it can stand straight when being lit, before pulling it up in the ceiling again. And then there's these concentric bands that form a cone shape above the lamp to accommodate the shape of the bell. And other Maghribi lamps that don't have bells also follow this conical shape. And whether or not the chicken or the egg, was it because of bell lamps that the conical shape becomes traditional in the Maghrib, is something that needs to be fleshed out still. So this would be type A, and type B basically is sort of a similar shape, but it consists of brackets, wing brackets that surround and engulf the bell. Often these brackets have openwork arabesque designs on them. And then here you can kind of see the bottom plate on which the bell rests, the bottom base on which the knobs are placed for raising it up and down have unique and distinct architectural ornamentation, which really resemble mosque grills, and the actual bottom of the base is resembling dome architecture from the medieval Maghribi period, both Almoravid and Umayyad architecture. I'd like to focus on one example today for this workshop from these 9 lamps that are extant in the Qarawin Mosque. There's also one lamp in the Great Mosque of Taza, and there's another lamp, bell lamp, that was from Algeria, from Oran, that is today in the Museo Arqueológico in Madrid. But today I'm just going to focus on this one lamp. This bell lamp hangs in the 6th cupola from the mihrab and preserves its original Latin inscription on the shoulder of the bell. The Latin inscription reads, Vox Domini sonat, Dominicus de Toro me fecit. And so basically the voice of the Lord resounds, and it's followed by this dedicatory inscription for the patron, which reads, perhaps Rodrigo me fecit, or me. In the course of the bell's reconfiguration, several Arabic inscriptions were added to the lamp, which suggests the triumphalistic light in which such lamps would have been seen. The circular band around the disc to which the bell is attached bears the following inscription written in Kufic script: "A'udhu billahi al-azim min ash-shaytani rajim." I ask God the Great for protection from the shaitan, or Satan the condemned, an apotropaic formula perhaps intended to counter the bell's original inscription. However, this inscription, I believe, or I argue, is peculiar, because normally when praying to God for protection against the shaitan, the prayer is immediately followed by the basmala, in the name of Allah, the most beneficent and merciful, as we all know. While in this case of this lamp, the inscription only consists of the prayer of protection from shaitan. I do not believe the inscription is incidental and is indicative of a wider and more nuanced history of Muslim-Christian interaction in the medieval period in relation with the ritual of the calling to prayer in both medieval and Islamic Christian traditions. And this is the aspect of the research that I'm going to be talking about today. The Christian bell was an object that was deeply entwined in the historical narratives of Muslim and Christian societies in the pre-modern era, especially in the regions of the Islamic world where Christian and Muslims interacted and coexisted. My research and current book projects suggest that commonplace cultural symbols and religious rituals, such as the Muslim call to prayer, the adhan, and its analogous counterpart, the ringing of the Christian church bell, continue to acquire transformative socio-cultural meanings throughout the history of the pre-modern Islamic world in both Muslim and Christian societies combined. These transformative meanings occurred as a result of religious and geopolitical developments and changes happening in these societies. In other words, I argue that fundamental religious rituals like bell ringing and the adhan continuously acquired new religious meanings which deviated significantly from the original function and intent of the primary rituals due to political, historical, and environmental circumstances in the pre-modern Islamic world. So even though the adhan and the Christian bell were primarily intended to be devices purposed to call the faithful to congregate in their respective houses of worship, over time in pre-modern Muslim societies, they became contested symbols of power, demarcators of space, and audible representations of social identity within pre-modern urban settings. And to understand this, we go back to the origin of the adhan in Muslim society. So when Islam was in its beginning stages in the early 7th century, it appears that early Muslims did not take any direct objection to their Christian and Jewish neighbors' public calls to prayer. In fact, early Muslim accounts detailing the inception of the adhan in Muslim culture often report that the Prophet Muhammad wished to call the early Muslims to congregate in his mosque in Medina one day. And his early followers suggested that he emulate the samantra, the wooden clappers, which you can see on the left here, of Nestorian Christians living in the Near East, or the shofar of the Jews of Arabia, to call the Muslims to prayer. In the Near East during this time, metal bells, this is something to note, were not used by Christians as communal signals. An important point to note is the use of the metal bell is a development of the Western Christian liturgy, first implemented at the beginning of the 5th century. So rather, in the late antique Near Eastern world, Christians used sementrons, as mentioned above, which was a long wooden plank that we can see, sometimes suspended by chains and sometimes portably carried. And it's beat with a large mallet to produce a signaling sound similar to that of a bell. Another narrative suggests that Muhammad was about to adopt the wooden clappers, but finally vocal formulas of key doctrinal phrases of the Islamic faith were compiled and suggested to the Prophet. These phrases became what we know of as the adhan today, and the Prophet ordered that it become customary to publicly announce these phrases before every prayer. In this manner, according to these early reports of the Prophet Muhammad's life, the adhan, although comprising human vocal recitation, was compared to Christian and Jewish call to prayers in the Near East already present at the moment of the inception of Islam. However, soon after the Prophet Muhammad died in 632 CE, the political dynamics of the early Muslim society began to shift drastically. By 634 CE, the early Muslim polities had begun to invade Byzantine lands north of Arabia, and they conquered the great Byzantine cities like Damascus, which had predominant Christian populations. As the Islamic conquest continued for the next century, invading many regions such as North Africa, which had previously been Byzantine and Visigothic Spain, newly arriving Muslims encountered pre-existing Christian communities with whom they would begin to compete for cultural dominance in the public sphere. Let's reiterate, early Muslims were initially the religious minority in these newly conquered lands. So it is what I argue that at this point, early Muslim rulers had to create new quote-unquote Islamic policies and laws directly pertaining to the large non-Muslim polities whom they were now governing. It is well known that Jewish, Christian, and Zoroastrian populaces were known as dhimmis in early Islam, or protected people, and they were considered by early Islamic jurists and theologians as Ahlul Kitab, people of the book, meaning that they too shared a common monotheistic belief system. In return for a poll tax known as the jizya, as we all know in medieval Arabic and Islamic texts, these populations were given protection by these newly established Muslim governments. The rules and regulations made for these newly conquered populations included policies regarding the Christian calls to prayer, which made very clear that audible and visual symbols of Christianity were prohibited in the public sphere. So let me talk about prohibition quickly. And I know I'm running out of time, so I might go off script and just discuss the slides in a discussion. So the earliest idea that we have, a recorded idea, which is recorded later in different versions in different historical sources, is the Pact of Omar. When Omar bin al-Khattab conquers Jerusalem in 634, the populations, the Christian populations under the, in 637, when he conquers it, a capitulation agreement is made with the Byzantine Patriarch of Jerusalem, Sophronius, in exchange for Omar's protection. And in this agreement, the Christians of Jerusalem agree on several stipulations. These stipulations are usually in the form of abasement of the Christians to their new Muslim rulers. And there's several provisions which involve Christian spaces of worship, the public display of religion, the agreement that proselytization and conversion to Christianity will not happen. And then there's symbolic separation and humiliation in terms of clothing. Important to our discussion today is that there is a provision against the public display of religion. According to Omar's pact, Christians promised, quote, "We will not beat our semetrons in churches except with a soft beat," end quote. And again, here it should be noted that the semetron was the device to call to prayers, and the word used in Arabic is naqus, which eventually, especially in the literature of medieval Spain, becomes synonymous with the bell. So what I'm arguing is that the soundscape of conquered cities had to literally echo the identity of their new Muslim rulers. The Muslim prohibition of Christian public calls to prayer, first documented in the Pact of Omar, appears to have become a persistent public policy throughout the political history of the entire medieval Islamic world. And the policy towards the beating of the semetron was emulated and implemented by subsequent Muslim rulers throughout the history of the pre-modern Islamic world. We can see it everywhere, and was extended to include bell ringing used in the liturgy of the Western Church in Europe and North Africa, as I mentioned above. Specifically of Jerusalem, if we fast forward to Jerusalem in the 15th century, we have an interesting passage from Felix Fabry, who traveled from his home to Jerusalem, his home of Ulm in Germany, to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage in 1483. During his travels, he was particularly sensitive to the absence of bells within the domain of the Burji Mamluk sultans, who at the time of his journey were the rulers of Egypt, Syria, and the Holy Land. He mentions this fact several times throughout his narrative. And in one instance, upon arriving to Jerusalem and seeing the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, he says, "The church has connected with it a lofty tower built of white marble stone, wherein once hung bells, and the beams and woodwork to support them may still be seen in the upper part where they used to hang. But when Jerusalem was lost and the bells were all cast down, for the heathens of the rite of Muhammad cannot endure bells, because they have a commandment in their Al-Quran not to use bells for the service of God, nor to suffer them to be used. Yet it is said that they like to hear their chimes, but that the only reason that why they do not have them is for fear that they should imitate us, against which the accursed Muhammad always took precautions." So Fabry obviously is speaking from local tradition, and he's factually incorrect that obviously there is no commandment in the Quran or the Prophet's hadith that really prohibit bells outright. But he must be looking at these underlying policies that had begun in the time of Omar and continued by Muslim rulers to suggest that bell ringing was not allowed. So to basically sum up today, I take this phenomena that is common throughout the medieval Islamic world, and I wanted to look further in Hadith literature to see what aspect of the bells would have been objectionable to Muslims, in addition to the policies created in the early political history. And to see that, if you kind of look at the evolution of the adhan, and the meanings of the adhan, you see a crossover between Christian traditions and Christian understandings of bell ringing, transferring into Muslim ideas of the adhan and the ritual of the adhan. So one good example of this is actually the adhan as a triumphalistic ritual. When we look at intra-Muslim relations, so the adhan itself in Muslim Christian narratives, it's quite obvious that when a Muslim conquered the city, stipulations about bell ringing and the pronouncement of the adhan was common. But when we look at Shia and Sunni relations in the medieval period, we see that when Shias also conquered a Sunni territory, they would actually object to a passage in the Quran, in the adhan, as-salatu khairun minan nawm, which was added by Omar bin al-Khattab, and they would replace it with their own formula and say that this is the public announcement of the adhan that has to be done from all mosques. And so they altered, in that sense, the adhan in the public sphere to echo the political and religious ideologies of the ruling party. And so this is something that is common throughout Sunni and Shia political narratives throughout the medieval period. In addition, and they replaced it with Ayala Lester. So when we look back at this lamp that I talked about with this inscription of A'udhu billahi al-azim minash shaitanir rajim, what is interesting then is that the bell itself in Hadith literature and also Islamic ritual and the adhan also gets attributed to being a apotropaic ritual that protects Muslims against the shaitan. So just to sum up, there's several hadiths. One is that
we are running out of time. Sorry.
All right. No worries. I'll just sum up in 1 minute. So that there is two hadiths from Sahih Muslim that basically say that the bell is an instrument of Satan, which is common and used in throughout several hadith collections. So that's our first link. There's also several hadith collections that say when one gives the adhan, that Satan starts running vehemently. There's other hadith traditions that talk about that if you give the adhan and you're lost, you'll find your way. There's also a tradition that when the Prophet's grandchildren were born, Hassan and Hussein, the Prophet gave the adhan in their ears, so to protect them from demons and the devil. And my argument is that in this early period, if we look at Christian bell ringing and its interpretation or bells in its interpretation in early Christianity, for instance, in John Chrysostom, who's a Byzantine writer in the 5th century, he writes that in one of his homilies that Christians had the habits of keeping bells on the cribs of their children. And he says that they don't need to do that. They should believe in the power of God and not the power of these bells and this ringing metal to chase away demons. And so I'll sum up with the last sentence I will say is that what I see as this apotropaic formula on this bell lamp here is a way for it to counter and purify the bell, not only with the power of the inscription, but also with the power of light. And so this is how I come to this idea of transforming sacred sound into sacred light and the convergence of two rituals seen in this particular object and artifact of bell lamps, which is peculiar to the Maghrib. Thank you so much, and I apologize for going over time.
Thank you very much. Sorry for, you started with Surah An-Nur, I will end with Iblis. I am here as Iblis, interrupting people from their, this. So hopefully we'll have a discussion, and I have some thoughts about those, bells and other things. So thank you very much for this, taking us also to Al-Maghrib, which is usually somehow neglected by art historians, I have to say, So our next speaker is Dr. Ayala Lester. Prior to her retiring, Dr. Lester served as the curator of Islamic archaeology at the repositories of the Israeli Antiquities Authority. Dr. Lester has written extensively on Fatimid metalware, Islamic glass, and jewelry from various periods, with an emphasis on the Fatimids. Ayala's work is usually also combine or try to combine also textual evidences, working with different sources like the Gnizia and other sources from the Fatimid period to put things in context and not leave those objects, so to say, out of context. So, and her research is very rich, and a lot of materials she published out of excavations in situ objects, and not only objects from museums. So Ayala will talk today ritual objects in the ancient mosque of Tiberias. And please, Ayala, the floor is yours.
לא, אני צריכה גם לראות אותם. כאן? אוקיי. אוקיי. Verse 35 of Surat An-Nur mentions the following. Allah is the light of heavens and the earth. His light is like a niche in which there is a lamp. The lamp is in crystal. The crystal is like a shining star. The belief that light has been given to the believers by the divinity is embodied in the prominent placing of mosque lamps in the hall of the mosque, and by the fact that glass enables the distribution of light throughout its transparent nature. The mosque lamp is characterized by its vase shape with handles on the globular body, to which metal chains were attached so that it could be suspended from the ceiling. During the early medieval period, the beginning of the Mamluk period, the mosque lamp reached its peak with the appearance of the enamel painting on glass. This type of lamp is known in Palestine during the 10th and 11th centuries, such as a fragment of a handle from Tiberia and large handles found at Baisan dated to the Abbasid and Fatimid period. A small fragmentary lamp, איך אני הולכת אחורה? עוד אחד. Sorry. No. A small fragmentary lamp found within the shipwreck in Serge Limani is dated about 1024. It is characterized by a globular body with star-shaped handles. Further evidence, further evidence is known from a Seljuk wall painting in Karakan, Iran, dated to 1067-68. It shows a lamp hanging in a niche with chains made of pierced metal sheet, connected to a chain with a hook for suspension, similar to the one from the Mosque of Tiberias. Lamps of this type were in use in Palestine during the 10th and 11th centuries. Fragment of large handles found at Beit-An, dated to the Abbasid and Fatimid period, were found also at Tiberias, dated to the 10th century. Further evidence relate to metal chains from which these lamps were hung. Massive chains were found during an ongoing excavations in Tiberias since the middle of the 20th century, conducted by Bezalel Rabbani, Zahar Hirschfeld, and Katja Seaton-Silverman from the Hebrew University, who lately identified one of the buildings as the Umayyad Friday Mosque of Tiberias, which existed until the Fatimid period. The mosque was a three-aisled pillared building reproducing the plan of the great Umayyad Mosque of Damascus. Chains which hung from the ceiling were found attached to ceramic tiles that had fallen from the roof. They are made of brass consisting of massive pieces composed of straight links alternating with figure 3 shaped links with a flower-shaped element at the end to which the chains of the lamp were attached. Several such chains were found during excavations that took place in Tiberias, and together the total length is more than 20 meters. The links are massive of high quality production using the sand cast technique. The local artisans maintain commercial connection with Damascus, Caesarea, and other locations throughout the Mediterranean basin as far as the west coast of Spain. Literary sources since the Umayyad period describe the tradition of illuminating the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dome of the Rock on the Haram Sharif, depicting the metal chains and the glass lamps suspended from them. El-Ad, in his monograph on Jerusalem during the Umayyad period, refers to several traditions regarding suspended lamps. One tradition is recorded by Abdurrahman family from the end of the Umayyad period. In the Haram, there were 385 chains, of which 285 were in the Haram and the remainder in the Dome of the Rock. In the whole of the Haram, there were 5,000 lamps on Friday night in the half months of Rajab, Sha'ban, and Ramadan, and on the night of these two festivals, 2,000 candles were also lit. Sabt ibn Jozi, from the middle of the 8th century, described the Haram Sharif in the following way. In the Haram, there were 5,000 lamps. In the Dome of the Rock, there were 400 chains that were 40,000 cubits long. Each night, lamps were lit in the Dome of the Rock and an identical number in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Ibn al-Faqih in the 9th century indicates that there were 500 copper chains in the Haram, and each night 600 lamps were lit, and 300 lamps illuminated the Dome of the Rock. According to the tradition of Ibn Abdul Rabi of the second half of the 9th century, in the whole of the Haram, there were 1,500 lamps, and in the Dome of the Rock, 460 lamps. These testimonies deal with the number of lamps lit on the Haram Sharif in the Dome of the Rock and the chains on which the lamps were hung. The numbers range between 300 to 500 chains. Sabt ibn Jozi refers to its total length of 40,000 cubits. If we take a cubit to be about 50 centimeters, thus the average length of a chain is about 8 meters, which seems to be likely as the height of the dome is about 21 meters. However, we have no evidence of its change, and nowadays the space is illuminated by chandeliers. The type of the mosque lamp changed during the Mamluk period into a massive lamp as big as 30 centimeters high with a diameter of 20 centimeters. The lamps were decorated with enamel colors and gilded. One of the earliest datable lamp originated in Cairo in a tomb built for a Mamluk emir. The inscription reads as follows: Mima amila birasm tubat al-makar al-ali al-alai al-bunduktar kadasallahu ruhu. This inscription, with a modest plea asking for God's sanctity, stands indifferent to most standard dedication formulas, which praise the owner of an article, wishing him happiness, success, richness, long life, etc. Furthermore, it mentions its devotion to the tomb. The tomb of the Emir Aidakin al-Alai, who died at 1285-86, was erected in about 1284, where a Hanka was also built. The family name derived from the name of the first owner of Aidakin when he was a young Mamluk of the Emir Ala ad-Din Aksumkur. The heraldic emblem of a bow may refer to his personal bow. Another unique lamp was made for one of the emirs of the Sultan, Al-Nasr Muhammad ibn Kalaun. It bears the light verse of the Quran on the neck with the following inscription on the body: Mima amala al-makar al-ali al-mawlawi al-mahdumi al-sayfi al-saki kawsun al-maliki al-nasiri. That was made for His Excellency, the Exalted, the Lord, the Royal, the well-safe Saif ad-Din Kawsun, the cupbearer of al-Malik Nasser. The lamp was probably commissioned for one of the complexes he built in Cairo. The heraldic emblem of a cupbearer signifies Kawsun's highest office of a cupbearer, a saki. The most unusual and significant inscription around the foot states that the work was accomplished by Ali ibn Muhammad al-Baramki, Hafidahullah. A last mosque I would like to present is ascribed to Saifuddin Tukuzdamur al-Hamawi, a cupbearer and then emir of the assembly of the Sultan Al-Nasr Muhammad ibn Kalaun, with a very unusual emblem of a cup and an eagle above it. The cup is not unusual. However, the eagle about it, with its head turned to the left, is less typical. The eagle, sometimes double-headed, does appear in Mamluk heraldry, but its significance is not clear and is probably connected with a regime, symbolized as a flying lion due to its power and wide wingspan. It could signify Tukuzdamur's office in Syria as a governor of Hama and Aleppo, and then the provincial governor of the region. In summary, the vase-shaped lamp with attached handles, a modest object during the early Islamic period, became a major article within the mosque during the Mamluk period. A miniature from the Maqamat of Al-Khariri depicts Abu Zayd preaching in the mosque of Samarkand, where he stands on a minbar and mosque lamps bearing inscriptions hanging from the ceiling are depicted. The affiliation of the lamp symbolizing God's light together with the mihrab, present the purest belief for the Muslims. This solemn idea was of high preference within the arts of Islam, such as this mihrab from Iran of the 14th century, surrounded by Surah Al-Fatiha. The tiles of the mihrab are painted in luster with the mosque lamp emphasized in turquoise. The shape of the lamp did not change during the ages, but its dimensions were increased together with the addition of a complex decorative layout. We would even suggest it is a bit of propaganda used by the sultans of the Mamluk period to demonstrate the power. It is one of a very few religious material artifacts in the Islamic belief. However, it has attracted the attention of historians since the Umayyad period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayala, for this presentation and for also giving us some time for the discussion. So if you please can end your share, and then we can see each other better. So please, the floor is open for questions. I think Lorenz, if you would like to answer the inquiries that or the ideas that already there in chat, I hope that you already read them, and if you have comments, other things, so please.
Yeah, thank you, Tawfiq. Yeah, some of the questions go clearly beyond what I've been able to research, and I think there is a vast literature on the sandals and the relics. And yes, of course, there are other relics of the Prophet. There is the famous chamber of relics in the Topkapı Saray Museum in Istanbul, where they are exhibited. Well, they used to be exhibited in a rather in a manner that played them down a little more, and in the last during the last 15 years, it has been turned more into a religious site. And it's not only the mantle, the Hırka-i Sherif, the mantle of the Prophet, that is on exhibited there, but also relics, other relics like body, well, hair from the beard of the Prophet, and other elements. Also, the sandal that I've shown in my presentation is from the Istanbul treasury. And of course, there is more. Iman Abdul Fattah wrote an article on the relics that had been gathered in Cairo, specifically by the Sultan Al-Ashraf Qaid Bey, and most of which were then transferred to Istanbul by the Ottoman sultans. But I think there is still the mosque of the relics of the Asar al-Nabi in Cairo, and I'm not sure whether, but I think there is also a footprint on display there. Yeah, the explanation in sources how the footprints were made. I think there is a it's among the miracles that the Prophet was able to perform, that his feet made imprints on stone, but when he walked over sand, they didn't leave an imprint. Similar to the fact that he didn't cast a shadow or other miraculous properties. I think that's it's not explained any further. It doesn't need any further explanation as far as I see. It's just miraculous and proof of prophethood. And William Perkis asked another question. The sandal, the large number of sandal relics, didn't it cause uneasiness with medieval believers? Not as far as I know. I have no report about disbelief or although we have that on other occasions. I mean, when we look at, for example, Abdel Ghani an-Nabulusi traveling, and he is presented an Uthmani Quran in Homs, he doubts it, and he said, well, I don't think it's really from Uthman's period. So there was critical thinking about that occasionally by some authors, but I haven't come across any criticism of multiplicity of sandals. And well, anyway, the Prophet might have possessed several pairs. It's not not impossible.
You can always get gifts, you know, delegations visiting him. You have different styles. So I have can we read this tiles from Damascus? The light is presenting somehow God, and now the sandals are presenting the Prophet. So you have both of them in the same niche or something like that. Like it's La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and then you have it in somehow like visual, in a visual way.
Okay, that's another thought. Yes, okay, you have the inscription on the lamp presenting God and the Prophet, and yes, and the Prophet is additionally visualized and symbolized by the sandals.
And
yes, why not? And but the niche, I think, is also a clear sign of a memory of the role of the Prophet as leader of the community. That reinforce, I mean, the elements reinforce each other in some way. Yes.
Yeah, so it's like a niche encompassing, like, let's say in late antiquity, a figure of a goddess or something. Right now we can't do that, so we have those symbols, maybe just.
Yep.
And about the carpet from the Selimiye, and there, maybe like the people who will pray there, in some way, they will stand like with the Prophet, let's say, if they will stand on the Prophet's sandals. This is like just the association of this.
Yes, it would be wonderful if we had contemporary sources confirming this this association. I mean, that people really were aware of the fact that they were stepping into the Prophet's sandals or footsteps. I haven't come across any of these sources yet, but I think it's the field is really vast.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah. So before giving Daphna the right, it's most of those things like that I see in the Dome of the Rock. You can put your hand and kiss. It's related to the first discussion that we have 2 days ago, but it was interesting to see the eighth Imam, how it was suspended. Like it's not, you can see it from, like, so it's similar to the tiles. It's interesting. So Daphna, please. Unmute yourself. We don't hear you, Daphna.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, thank you all for the all three fascinating papers, and for Daniela and Yoni again and again for putting everything together and making this conference possible. With regard to Lorenz' presentation, and perhaps more generally, I would like to mention 2 recent studies published recently in a volume on saintly spheres and Islamic landscapes that offer observations on the role of epigraphy and iconography in communicating a religious message. I just copied it from the introduction, and making architectural settings into places of worship and communal gatherings. It combines together the worship, the audience, the reaction of the audience, and the inscription and iconography. And I refer to these two are. The first is by Fatima Qureshi on the Maliki necropolis in Sindh, to the southeast in the southeast province of Pakistan. The second by Angela Anderson on the Alevi Sems in Turkey and the diaspora. As to the prophet's footnotes, as an icon that evokes veneration and the wish to touch it. Sarah Korn, who lectured yesterday, in the same volume, shows how the prophetic iconography was adopted and replicated as a sign of saintliness. In the case of Sari Sartuk, the famous warrior saint in the Ottoman Ottoman conquest of the Balkans, and how these relics, the sandals, the footprints of the sandals, are venerated to these days also by Christian. So again, this is a volume which I edited together with Sarah Wolper as an expert in art, and everyone knows her, of course, here, all the art and architecture experts, and Paulo Pinto, who is an anthropologist, and myself as a historian of Sufism. So we put together, it is divided into 3 parts. Each one was responsible for his field of expertise, but I think that it contributes to everyone who wants to bring these issues together. I hope so.
Yeah, thank you so much for these bibliographic hints. Thank you.
Thank you, Daphna. If we'll have time, Yamit, I would like to hear your, I once heard you talking about wax, those rocks coming. So if we'll have time, maybe you'll comment on that. So to Dr. Alibhai, like your talk remind me that metal columns in India, let's say in Quwwat al-Islam and other mosques that were reused, let's say, if we can use this term, by the Muslims, and what Barry Flood wrote about. So do you think there is some kind of sacredness, maybe, if we use this term, with those bells when they are transferred?
Yeah, is it possible for me to share my screen? Because I brought the image of what you're talking about. Let me see if I can just quickly go to. So I actually, in the other instances, I actually brought this image of the Quwwat al-Islam Mosque. Just because this is the one, so this is the pillars that were taken from 27 Jain Hindu temples and reused in the mosque again. This is the one location in the world where so it's a pan-Islamic phenomena that we see. It's in Safavid Iran, it's in Ottoman Turkey, it's also in Jerusalem, as we saw under the Mamluks. It's in the Maghrib, where bells are sort of prohibited and reused in the material culture in some form or fashion. In the Quwwat al-Islam Mosque, when they reused the pillars, obviously bells were also part of the Hindu form of worship. But in the chronicles and I don't see an objection here, because you can see in the image on the right that they're using quite purposefully a pillar with a bell in it. So here, I guess, with the idea of sacredness and the reuse, a lot of people have been pointing me in this direction, because there's a 15th century writer who writes about Fez and these bell lamps when he visits the Fez Mosque. and he calls it a Nakus al-Mubarak. And I don't understand why he uses the word Mubarak, and someone challenged my whole interpretation of the idea of the Jaras being Mizmarun min Madamir Shaitan, because of this word Mubarak that appears in Al-Jaznai. I still, considering the fact that the clappers were taken out, they're silenced, they're engulfed by light, I'm still convinced that they weren't seen in this sort of reverent form or fashion, but maybe as a comparable, which was sort of the point that I was making, is that bells can dispel storms, they can chase away the devil, they can protect children, and you see the same components sort of translating over in the adhan. So the meanings basically are considered reverent, but the object itself probably irreverent, in my opinion.
I actually, thank you. I actually was mainly talking about, if you remember, in front of the main Iwan of the Quwwat al-Islam, there is a metal column with an inscription. This is like different than spolia, what we had here. So it was already ancient, reused by in temples, and then Muslims. So it's quite interesting what flow is developing there. So.
Right.
And another thing, when I was touring Maghrib and visiting those places, even in madrasas by the Banu Marine, I think in Bu'naniya, you have also such a thing. They are quite heavy, like things inside you. I was at least afraid that those things will fall down. You know, and you don't really see the bell when in like from human height, let's say. You have to go like, so I wonder how they were looking on those things, because usually you see it as you present it from below, and there you see, as you say, those decorations from architecture. So it's interesting, the idea how they looked on those things. And
yeah, they completely disappear, and that's interesting, is that the Bu'inaniya one that you're talking about, that actually doesn't have a bell in it, but it's made to look like the ones that have bells in it. And so that begs the question, is that, remember, these bells were taken from Iberia. So we have instances in the chronicles where the Al-Muwahhidun army basically loses the battle with the Christians in a town called Huete, but they're able to seize 9 bells from the city. And so the Al-Mahad Caliph basically says, well, even though we've lost, we're still going to march our mule train with all the spoils of war. And so it specifically says in the text, I think it's Ibn Idari, that he puts 9 bells on the mules so that everybody can see them being marched out of the city. So we have to imagine these heavy bells weighing, over 1,000 pounds likely, or maybe 800, they're quite heavy, being brought on these mule trains, then also put on ships, and then brought over on camels to all these cities that are not coastal cities, Fez and Marrakesh and all these things. So it's the amount of effort that they put to bring these over, and then to have them sort of disappear, to be engulfed completely by light, makes me more think that, yeah, they're there symbolically. They're not there to be actual visual symbol in some ways. Yeah.
Any questions for Dr. Alibhai, please?
Ayala, go ahead.
Nick, please.
Nick, did you want?
I just wanted to ask you a quick question about the bells. And you mentioned this sort of polemical a text saying about contrasting the I guess you might say kind of blind following of the clanging of the metal versus the following the light. And I was curious about to what extent that and also when you make inscriptions on an already inscribed object, when you inscribe in Arabic on an object inscribed in Latin, there is any kind of a commentary going on about literacy itself, where light illuminates scripture, which is actually accessible to believers, versus sound, which replaces text, which is unknown to believers because they can't access it themselves. Does that ever come up sort of as a main theme in this kind of practice?
I think, I mean, so inscriptions on the bells themselves, the inscription that I showed is actually on the alterations that are made to the lamp, but not on the bell itself. But Al-Jaznai, the 15th century traveler that I talked about, that went to Fez and writes about Fez and in detail, he actually writes that one of the lamps, I think in the 8th cupola, has a long inscription on it in which he sort of says that this was brought from Gibraltar during the Marinid era by a Marinid prince and brought back as a sign of triumph. And so unfortunately, like when we look at the bell today, the inscription is not there. So whether he was kind of assuming or it's something that he heard or thought that the inscription was on there or not. But the bells themselves, they didn't inscribe Arabic to my knowledge, at least. I'd have to take a second look at it on the bells themselves. And it's the alterations of the lamps that are attached to the bells where all the epigraphy appears. And so to me, I think the point that I'm arguing is that the epigraphy, which has sort of these common phrases like La ghaliba illallah, a'udhu billahi minash shaitan, and then in some of them the Surah An-Nur is there, the 99 names of Allah are on some of them. They're made to counter sort of this this powerful symbol that they know is powerful enough that they're taking them from churches and bringing them back to sort of be a counter, if not apotropaic inscription that is sort of countering the perceived power of these Christian objects that are being brought back, and that's kind of where I'm going with the research, and basing it on their previous assumption. What is the medieval Islamic ideology? Is least sprouting from religious jurisprudence and hadith literature on bells and bell ringing specifically. And as I said, there's just so many that link bells to sort of being an instrument of Satan. But on the flip side, if you look at bells in the Christian tradition, they also obtain apotropaic properties like being able to chase away devils, storms, blessing children, chasing away demons. Those components seem to transfer during this period of translation into the call to prayer, the Muslim call to prayer. So that's where the translation occurs. So again, the lamps, I see them as a convergence of these two rituals, lighting and the dominance of the adhan and the apotropaic properties that are sort of taken in the adhan, sort of manifested in these artifacts. So,
Thank you.
May I add a sentence?
Yes, I assume there's no bus waiting for us for the tour, so we can like take some few minutes more. So please.
Yeah, just Ayala mentioned the extra lighting of the mosques on Rajab and Shaban, and I just say that this is viewed critically by some, with criticism by some scholars. So you all talked about light as symbolizing the light of God and having this very positive associations with it. But some of 13th and 14th century scholars who argue against special prayers held in Shaban and Rajab as bid'ah specifically mention the waste of money entailed in this sumptuous lighting of the mosques. And so we find this as repeated in the criticism against those specific rituals.
I have to say, those people of the bid'ah are living in another world that we are, people dealing with material culture, are living with. We have a lot of material there, and people of the bid'ah are living in another place. So with all the respect. So Ayala, I have a question. Is there any difference between the different chains? I think there were at least two maybe from Tiberia that were found. No, one?
No, there are much more.
More. So there is any difference between the ones in front of the mihrab or no?
No. these very unique chains are very, very similar. I mean, when you look at them, the differences between the links may be a few millimeters, which means the amount of metal that was poured into the mold. I mean, they are very, very, very similar, and they were all made in the same molds. I mean, I think those chains are the best and of the best quality of chains I ever saw. I mean, if you look at them, sometimes you think they were produced yesterday. I mean, after cleaning, their situation is wonderful. But it wasn't, I think when they were produced, no one thought about the use, whether they'll be in front of the mihrab or will be just hung, in the space of the masjid.
Yeah. So there is no hierarchy in some way of light inside. Yeah. So Yamit, if you would like, you can have a minute and talk about this imprints in your world, how they were done. Rock was softer before Islam,
Okay, yes, thank you. I'm just thinking some thoughts about the unique status of imprinted stones imprints that are something that is like a representation of the absent body. Unlike other relics that are like the material itself, either if it is a limb of a saint or a sandal, which is a presence. The imprint is the absence within the material. So it is a presentation of something that is no longer there. And I wonder if there is any difference between the way the sandals, which are like positive relics, and the imprints, which are like where the material is no longer there, if there is any difference in the way that the sandals and the imprints were venerated. And also I was wondering if there is any discussion concerning the possibility of material bodily relics of the Prophet. Just some thoughts, questions. I'm not familiar with the realm of Islamic culture. Thanks.
Professor Korn, Lorenz, you want to say something, or it's we live in this way?
Thank you, Yamit, for bringing this up. I think the the comparison between footprint and sandal, you made it very clear. Yeah, the footprint is the sign of something that has passed and clearly is no longer there, and the images of footprints and sandals, then maybe we can say that they unite the two on the same level of representation. I mean, presentation also in that sense. And I don't see many differences in the kind of veneration that are recorded. Touching, kissing, if possible. I mean, now it's no longer possible to touch the sandal of the Prophet in Istanbul. As far as I know, something that was also mentioned yesterday, gathering the dust that had settled on the relics was a common practice in Istanbul under the sultans. The dust was collected, and I don't exactly know to what purposes it was used, but certainly positive. It was assumed that it had gathered the barakah from the relics as well. Yeah, so that's an important aspect, that the two are distinct from each other, but they can be considered under the same auspices. I'm not, yeah, sorry, there was another aspect or something else that you
Yes, thank you. I was wondering if there is any discussion in the sources concerning the possibility of actually having relics of the body of the prophet.
Yes, I think surely there is. I mean, there is a discussion on the tomb of the prophet and the way how to approach it and how to venerate it, or to where the limits of veneration should be. Clearly, that was a hot discussion, and I'm not sure whether this discussion is already finished in terms of what the Saudi government are doing in Medina and making possible for pilgrims or preventing pilgrims from doing.
So, and this is like, will take us to another, and I already pushed the limits with the organizers. So thank you very much for your talks and for your reactions and for your patience, everybody here, and for the organizers giving me this, or me pushing those things. So thank you all for listening and participating. Daniela is...
Yeah, thanks very much to all. We will reconvene at 5. And go on a tour, as promised.